Hello there, my sleepy fellows. Tonight, let's take a gentle walk through the candlelit corridors of a place many of you hold close to your hearts, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. But this time, we're not here to watch great battles or face dreadful spells. No, tonight's tale is much quieter, much softer. It's a story whispered between ancient stone walls and behind silent glass mirrors, where magic hums softly like the rhythm of a lullaby. Tonight's story is about Harry. Yes, the Harry you know. But this tale isn't about heroics or danger. It's about curiosity, wonder, a single choice on a sleepy evening that opened a hidden path, one only the quietest steps could find. It's about a mirror and a door behind it, a door that hadn't opened in centuries, one that held something forgotten, something waiting. But don't worry, there's no need to be afraid. Everything in this tale unfolds slowly, like a dream you remember only in pieces after waking. This is a story for rest, for quiet breaths and softened thoughts. You don't need to remember every detail. You only need to feel it gently surrounding you. Before we begin, if you enjoy stories like this, tales that bring you back to the magical corners of Hogwarts, just as your eyes begin to flutter closed, consider subscribing or saving this one for another night. Maybe even share it with someone else who needs a little calm. You're always welcome here, and there are many more doorways waiting in the castle's shadows. Now then, it was late autumn at Hogwarts. The days had grown shorter, and the stone floors held a chill that made your toes curl unless you wore your warmest socks. Outside, the wind pressed against the high castle windows like a sleepy giant sighing into the night. Inside, lanterns floated lazily above the corridors, their golden glow dancing gently on walls dusted with age. Most students were already in their common rooms, wrapped in blankets, books in hand, or chatting softly beside the fireplaces. The fireplaces crackled with a comforting sound, like warm parchment crumbling softly in your hands. Everything was calm, and somewhere in the heart of the castle, just past a long-forgotten staircase that turned ever so slightly to the left when no one was looking, a mirror stood quietly against the wall, tall and thin, with ivy-like carvings curling around its silver frame. Most who passed by saw only their own reflection, perhaps a little sleepier than usual, eyes half closed with thoughts of bed. But that evening, Harry would see something else, something that would change the way he saw the castle forever. And so, with your head resting gently against your pillow and your breath slowing to match the soft rhythm of this enchanted place, let us begin. Let us follow Harry to the mirror and to the door behind it. It had been a peaceful week at Hogwarts, the kind of week where the castle seemed to breathe in sync with its students, slowly, gently, as if it too were wrapped in a soft woolen blanket. The autumn air carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke, and every corridor felt touched by hush and harmony. Harry Potter, now a little older than when you first met him, walked the halls with quiet curiosity. He had grown, not just in height or age, but in the way he noticed things. The flicker of candlelight on an ancient suit of armor, the soft creak of a staircase that hadn't been walked in years. These weren't things he would have seen during his first year, when life had been full of rushing and revelations. But now he paused more often. He listened. Harry had always been curious, but lately, his mind wandered toward gentler questions, not just about dark wizards or hidden spells, but about forgotten corners of Hogwarts, stories that had slipped between the cracks of history. What secrets might be waiting not behind great enchantments, but behind quiet things? His best friends, Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger, were never far away. Ron was often found in the common room, laid out like a sleepy cat across the couch, absently moving a wizard's chess piece back and forth with one hand while munching on a leftover biscuit with the other. Hermione, ever the student, had softened lately too, less hurried, more present. She had started reading by the window just for the view, letting her books sit closed beside her from time to time. The three of them had been through so much, but right now, their days were simpler, calmer, and Harry, especially, had found himself drawn to long walks alone, exploring parts of the castle even the Marauder's map didn't quite remember. Then there was nearly headless Nick, the ghost of Gryffindor Tower, who often floated nearby, eager for conversation. "The mirrors, dear boy," he once whispered as Harry passed through the West Hall. "They see more than they show, if you look without looking." And Harry had remembered that. Not because it made perfect sense, but because it felt like the sort of thing that would. On this particular evening, Harry had wandered farther than usual, his steps slow and thoughtful. He wore a soft jumper over his uniform shirt, his scarf looped loosely at his neck. His wand was tucked away, not because he didn't expect magic, but because tonight felt like a night meant for listening, not casting. The halls were quiet. Only the occasional distant giggle from the Hufflepuff corridor or the slow thud of a door closing gently in the library wing could be heard. It was the kind of stillness that invites you to notice every little thing, and somewhere, just ahead, that mirror waited, not to reflect, but to reveal. The evening had fallen into a deep hush, as if the castle itself were tucking in for the night. The portraits were dozing, the candles burning lower and slower, their flames flickering like lazy thoughts at the edge of sleep. Even the staircases had stopped shifting, settling into place with soft, final clicks, as though they too had found their resting spots for the night. Harry moved quietly along the fourth-floor corridor, where the stonework was smoother, paler, and older than in most parts of the castle. It was a part of Hogwarts that felt slightly out of step with the rest, not because it was strange or haunted, but because it felt forgotten, like a melody only a few remembered how to hum. He wasn't sure why he'd come this way. Perhaps it had been Nick's whisper about mirrors that had stuck in his mind. Or maybe the castle itself, in its gentle, magical way, had nudged him here through the soft pull of curiosity. He passed a long window, the glass misted with breath from the inside, frosted with quiet from the outside. Beyond it, the lawn sloped away into moonlit silver, the whomping willow still and asleep in the windless dark. A few stars blinked gently above, as though they, too, were listening. Then he saw it. A mirror, not tall like the Mirror of Erised. This one was narrow and unframed, embedded right into the wall at the end of the corridor, as though it had always been part of the castle and yet had never been noticed. Harry paused in front of it. At first, it seemed completely ordinary. No shimmer, no flicker, no reflection of anything unusual. Just Harry, standing in a long corridor, with a scarf draped around his neck and a soft, thoughtful look in his eyes. But as he leaned in, only slightly, he noticed something. His reflection didn't move. It stayed still for just a breath longer than it should have. Not frozen, not eerie, just delayed. Harry stepped back, furrowing his brow. The mirror returned to normal. He tilted his head, and the reflection tilted too, but just a fraction slower than expected, like watching someone pretend to be your reflection a second too late. He stepped closer again, this time bringing his wand out, not to cast a spell, but simply holding it in the quiet way one might carry a candle into an old room. The wand didn't hum or spark. No danger, no darkness, just stillness. Then the reflection blinked. Harry hadn't. He froze, his breath catching gently in his chest. But the feeling wasn't fear, it was intrigue. The kind of hush you feel in the library just before you find the seer you weren't looking for. The kind of stillness that holds its breath with you. Then, in the mirror, his reflection turned around. Harry hadn't moved. He watched, heart steady but eyes wide, as the mirrored version of himself slowly walked away in the reflection, revealing not the corridor behind him, but something entirely different. It was a room, dimly lit, made of the same stone as Hogwarts, but lined with softly glowing runes that pulsed like breathing embers. A velvet curtain draped across the far side, and beyond it, a door. Not grand, not menacing, just there. Harry leaned forward, and the surface of the mirror rippled, not like water, but like air moving through silk. He could feel the pulse of magic now, but it wasn't sharp or cold. It was warm, like the hush before dawn, as if the castle was whispering, "Yes, this is for you, if you're gentle enough to see it." He reached out a hand, slowly, fingertips brushing the mirror's cool surface, and just as his skin met the glass, it gave way. There was no sudden flash, no dizzying pull, just a gentle slide, as though walking through a curtain of light. Harry stepped forward and felt the shift beneath his feet. The world behind the mirror was real. The corridor was gone. He stood now in the very room he'd seen, the glowing runes painting soft shapes across the walls like lullabies written in ancient magic. It was warmer here, not from fire, but from presence. It felt like it in it, or remembered, a room that hadn't been entered in decades, or perhaps only yesterday. The velvet curtain was ahead. He walked toward it slowly, letting his hand brush the edges of tables and shelves along the way. Each surface held odd little things: quills without ink, books with blank pages that shimmered faintly in gold under the rune light, a chessboard with no pieces, just carved squares that hummed softly when he passed. The air had a hush to it, not silent, but expectant. When he reached the curtain, He paused. Something in him felt that going farther would mean understanding something, not dark, not dangerous, but important, and maybe forgotten. Harry drew the curtain back with a soft sweep. There, set gently in the stone wall, was a door. It looked ordinary, wooden, arched, no handle, no keyhole, but it glowed slightly around the edges, like it had something behind it. It was keeping safe, not locked away, but lovingly hidden. He didn't try to open it. Instead, he sat down on the soft stone floor and just looked at it. The door hummed very faintly, not with sound, but with memory. And then Harry realized something. The air around him, it smelled like the Gryffindor common room, not entirely, but faintly. A trace of old fires, a whiff of toasted marshmallows, and the musky warmth of wool and parchment. It smelled like home. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he heard something. Not loud, not even clear, just the quietest whisper. A voice, his own, a memory, a reflection. Not all doors are made to open. Some are made to remind. Harry opened his eyes again. The door was still there, unchanged, but now he noticed something new carved into the stone above the arch. Just faintly was a message. Only those who've seen both sides of the mirror may pass. Harry read it again, and he smiled just a little, because for the first time in a long while, he didn't need to understand everything. The mystery didn't feel like a problem to solve. It felt like a story to listen to. He stood up, gave the door one last thoughtful look, and turned back toward the curtain. As he re-entered the mirrored room, the runes dimmed slightly, like a candle respectfully lowering its flame as someone exits a library. And when he stepped back through the mirror into the corridor once more, the mirror returned to stillness. But Harry's eyes held something new, not worry, not urgency, but a kind of peaceful curiosity. A door had shown itself, not to be opened, but to be remembered, and somewhere inside him, Harry knew this was only the beginning of a much gentler kind of magic. The next morning at breakfast, Harry found himself staring absently at the enchanted ceiling of the great hall. Clouds drifted slowly across a pale blue sky, tinged with the soft amber glow of early sunlight. It was a calm kind of day, the kind Hogwarts gave out only rarely, the sort that made you want to wander the corridors without purpose, just to hear the old floorboards creak and see what quiet secrets the castle was humming to itself. Ron sat beside him, noisily spreading marmalade on toast, and Hermione flipped through a heavy book beside her porridge, muttering something about the ethics of magical animal research. It was all ordinary, all familiar. But for Harry, the memory of the hidden mirror room lingered, like the warmth of a dream long after waking. He hadn't told anyone, not yet. It wasn't that he didn't trust them. Ron and Hermione were part of every mystery he'd ever faced. But this wasn't a mystery to solve. It felt delicate, something you didn't explain with words, but understood with silence. So he held it gently in the back of his mind, like a secret parchment folded in his pocket, waiting for the right moment to unfold it. After classes, when the castle had emptied into the kind of quiet only Hogwarts knew how to hold, Harry wandered back to the corridor. The mirror was still there, still unassuming, still reflecting him, only a second too late. He stepped forward, once again letting the glass ripple gently at his touch, like a pond greeting an old friend. The room beyond welcomed him just as before. The runes glowed faintly. The soft curtain still fluttered slightly from a breeze that didn't exist. The door remained closed but content, as though its purpose had never been about being opened. But something was different this time. Just behind the velvet curtain, lying gently on the stone floor, was a scroll rolled tightly and tied with a crimson ribbon. It looked freshly placed, no dust, no fading, as if someone or something had left it there for him. Harry bent down and untied the ribbon. The parchment unfurled with the soft crackle of old magic. There were no words, just a map, drawn in faint ink that shimmered when touched by light. The map wasn't of Hogwarts, but it felt beneath it. A tangle of corridors and staircases, not in any textbook he'd seen. No labels, no instructions, just a single small dot in gold near the center, a dot shaped like a mirror. Harry blinked. He traced the path with his finger, following the loops and turns until the map ended, not in a room, but in what looked like a circle of mirrors, 12 to be exact. At the center of them, a stone pedestal, and nothing more. There was no legend, no clues, but something in him stirred her gently. Not curiosity, not adventure, wonder. He looked up from the map, and there, in the room that had been still and quiet only moments ago, stood someone. A girl. She looked no older than Harry, slightly translucent, like a ghost, but warmer. Her eyes shimmered like water beneath moonlight, and her robes were the deep blue of midnight sky just before dawn. She didn't speak, but she smiled, softly, like someone remembering something lovely. Harry didn't reach for his wand. He didn't need to. The magic in the room was kind, not hidden, protective, not powerful. The girl stepped to the side, gesturing to the map in his hands. Her expression held both joy and something quieter, hope. Then she pointed toward the far corner of the room where Harry had never ventured. A part of the stone wall pulsed faintly, as though it had just remembered it was a door. He stepped forward, folding the map carefully and tucking it into his robes. The girl didn't follow, but her eyes remained on him, watching, waiting, almost grateful. As he pressed his hand against the stone, it shifted soundlessly, revealing a spiraling staircase that descended into warm, amber-lit darkness. He turned once more. The girl raised her hand gently in farewell, and then she vanished. Harry stepped into the stairwell. The descent was slow, not because the stairs were steep, but because the air grew thicker with magic the further he went. It wasn't stifling, more like walking through memories. Old spells whispered around him, half-formed thoughts drifting like dust motes in candlelight. He reached the bottom after what felt like both moments and hours. A room awaited him, circular, wide. The floor was made of black stone, etched with silver thread-like lines, tracing paths like spider webs. And there, just as the map had shown, stood a circle of 12 mirrors. Each stood tall, framed in gently glowing silver, their glass rippling faintly as though alive. At the center, a pedestal, No books, no wand, just a small, round stone, gray and unremarkable. But when Harry stepped inside the ring of mirrors, something stirred. The air shimmered, and the mirrors began to move. Not in place, they stayed standing, rooted in the stone, but their surfaces rippled and changed. Each one now showed a different version of Harry. Not illusions, not dreams, possibilities. One mirror showed him as a teacher, standing before young witches and wizards, chalk dust on his robes and joy in his smile. Another showed him walking the quiet streets of Hogsmeade with a family, his own. Another reflected an older Harry, alone in a small cottage surrounded by wildflowers, content and quiet, with Fox perched nearby like an old friend. Each mirror whispered gently, not in words, but in feelings. Each possibility soft, unthreatening, each a future that could be if the right door was opened, or perhaps simply not closed. Harry stood in the center, heart steady, not overwhelmed, just still. The stone on the pedestal pulsed gently. He reached for it, and the moment his fingers touched the cool surface, a voice filled the room, not loud, but gentle. Every choice leaves a shadow. Every step echoes. It wasn't a warning. It was a lullaby. The mirrors shimmered one by one, and as they did, they faded, each future slipping away like the tide returning to sea, all except one. The mirror directly in front of him held steady. It showed him as he was, but with a single difference. Behind him, in the reflection, stood the girl from the mirrored room, smiling, whole, real. She looked free. Harry blinked, and the image disappeared. Now, there was only his own reflection once more, softly lit, thoughtful, surrounded by quiet. He turned the stone over in his hand, and carved into its underside, barely visible, were the same words he'd seen above the door. Only those who've seen both sides of the mirror may pass. He pocketed the stone, not to keep it, but to understand it. Then he turned, walking slowly up the spiral staircase again. As he emerged from the mirrored room, the hallway felt unchanged. But Harry had changed, not in a grand way, but in the way a person softens when they finally hear a song they forgot they loved. He looked back at the mirror. Its surface was calm. His reflection matched him exactly. No delay, no ripple, just him, in the quiet hallway of a castle that always gave more than it took. And somewhere deep in the castle's walls, 12 mirrors slept once more, holding futures not yet chosen, waiting with gentle patience. The next few days at Hogwarts unfolded like pages in a slow-turning book. Classes resumed with their usual rhythm, soft discussions in the dungeons of potions, the subtle hum of spells and charms, the drifting scent of herbs and greenhouses kissed by misty rain. Yet through it all, Harry walked with a quieter sort of awareness, as though some part of the castle now whispered his name in a new tone, welcoming but curious. Each night, he returned to the mirror, not always stepping through, but always watching, waiting, wondering. There were no more messages left behind. The translucent girl didn't reappear. The map remained safely tucked in the pocket of his cloak, but the memory of the circle of mirrors lingered like soft moonlight behind his thoughts, always there, casting faint ripples across his attention. On the fourth night, something changed. not loudly, not startling, but with the gentle insistence of rain beginning on old glass. The mirror room was silent as always. The soft glow of the runes still pulsed rhythmically, almost like a sleeping heartbeat. But tonight, the pedestal in the center had something new. A candle, thin, white, unlit, and lying beside it, a single match wrapped in a folded scrap of parchment. Harry stepped inside. He knelt, lifting the parchment gently. There were only 6 words. Light it only when you're ready. He looked at the candle, unremarkable, plain wax. And yet, something in him hesitated. What did it mean to be ready? He didn't know. So he placed the match and candle back exactly as they were and stepped away, choosing instead to observe, to feel. That same evening, back in the common room, Hermione was curled up with a thick tome, Ron was losing at wizard chess, and Crookshanks slept sprawled across an open window. All was normal, and Harry felt it again, that odd pull beneath the surface of things. Not fear, not danger, just quiet weight, as though Hogwarts itself had exhaled and was watching what he would do next. He stood up. "I'm going for a walk," he said softly. Ron looked up from the board. "You okay, mate?" Harry nodded. "Just a bit restless." Hermione didn't even look up. "Take your cloak. It's windy near the astronomy tower." Harry smiled faintly. They didn't know, and yet, somehow, they always knew. He wandered the corridors without direction, passing old portraits, humming lullabies to themselves, the suit of armor that always muttered poetry after dusk, and the hidden archway that only opened to those who had forgotten something they didn't mean to. Eventually, he found himself standing outside the old mirror once again. It shimmered, just slightly, as he approached, recognizing him now like an old friend returning for one more story. He stepped through. The candle and match remained untouched, but tonight, something else had changed. On the wall opposite the pedestal, where once there had been only blank stone, now flickered a faint outline of a door. Not physical, not carved, but sketched in light, like a memory drawn in starlight, visible only if you looked without blinking. Harry approached slowly. The moment he reached out, a hush fell over the room. The runes dimmed, the very air softened, like the stillness before snowfall, and the door began to pulse faintly. He didn't open it, not yet. Instead, he turned back to the candle, sat cross-legged on the floor, waited. The castle, it seemed, was teaching him patience, and patience has a kind of magic of its own. For days after, he returned again and again, and each time the mirror's room revealed just a little more. One evening, the door's glow deepened slightly, and a faint breeze slipped beneath it, smelling of cedarwood and forgotten parchment. Another night, the runes along the wall rearranged themselves, only slightly, but enough that a soft whisper of music echoed when Harry passed near them, like a lullaby sung by distant voices. Once, he found a small golden feather resting on the pedestal where the candle had been, and though he couldn't explain how, he knew it was from the girl, or perhaps what the girl had once become. In class, his thoughts wandered. He caught himself drawing soft spirals in the margins of his parchment. the shapes of the 12 mirrors repeating in the ink. During meals, he found his eyes tracing the candlelight on the great hall's ceiling, wondering if the same flame that would light the hidden candle might someday be reflected in the stars themselves. Yet through all this, the castle remained quiet, respectful, not rushing him, letting him find the rhythm. Until one evening, in the mirror room, he sat once more with the candle in front of him, the match now resting in his palm, soft and patient. "Are you ready?" the silence seemed to ask. Harry didn't speak. He just struck the match. The flame sparked to life, small, gentle, steady. He touched it to the candle's wick, and the flame leapt softly into being. There was no explosion, no blinding light, just warmth. And then something happened that hadn't before. The mirror, the one he'd stepped through so many times, flickered, and instead of his reflection, Harry saw something new, not another version of himself, not the circle of mirrors, but a corridor, stone, narrow, and twisting away into a place he'd never seen. It didn't call to him, it didn't beckon, it simply was, and an invitation perhaps, or a path remembered. And though the flame of the candle burned steadily beside him, Harry felt the temperature around him drop, not cold, but clear, like the air before a storm that had already passed. The runes on the walls now glowed steadily, as if satisfied. The hidden door across the room pulsed once, and then began to fade. Not vanish, fade, like mist returning to sky. Harry stood. The mirror remained open, the corridor still flickering softly within. But he didn't step through, not yet. He returned the matchstick to the stone beside the candle, then turned, walking back toward the mirror's surface. As he approached, the image shifted again, this time showing only himself. But behind him, in the reflection, the girl had returned. Her smile was softer now, less like a memory, more like a goodbye, and on the glass itself, just beside his shoulder in the reflection, a faint line of light etched itself. When you know, the door opens. He raised a hand toward the glass, didn't touch it, just watched his fingers hover, breath still, then turned and walked away, the image remaining behind him like a page only half turned. Back in the Gryffindor common room that night, the fire crackled gently. Ron snored faintly nearby. Hermione had drifted asleep with a book still open on her chest. Harry sat quietly, staring into the flames. The mirror had shown him something, yes, but it wasn't about the corridor. It wasn't about a door. It was about him, and what it meant to choose stillness over rushing, to light a candle without knowing what it would reveal. The story wasn't over, but something inside him had shifted, and Hogwarts was waiting, still humming, still holding its breath, ready when he was. The morning light at Hogwarts came in slowly, spilling over stone walls with golden patience. Everything about the castle seemed to stretch awake, as though even the portraits blinked a little slower, yawning in oil paint and brushing the dust of dreams from their shoulders. Harry stirred beneath the covers in the Gryffindor dormitory, the memory of the lit candle still lingering in the back of his mind. Its flame had not been loud, and yet it had opened something, not a physical door, not quite, something softer, a passage made of permission, of readiness. The day passed gently. The scent of breakfast lingered longer than usual. Toast, honey, and something sweetly spiced. In Transfiguration, McGonagall's voice seemed more melodic than usual, like someone reciting poetry. Even Filch was uncommonly quiet, muttering to himself, but not bothering with the usual growl. And through it all, Harry thought, the mirror hadn't asked him to go further. It had simply shown him that he could. By evening, the choice had begun to bloom like a quiet flower inside his chest. Not urgent, but steady. And so, when twilight rolled its soft gray blanket over the castle and the halls turned blue with hush, Harry found himself once again in front of the tall mirror. But this time, he didn't step through. Instead, he sat just before it, cross-legged, watching, breathing, letting the mirror reflect not what was behind him, but what he felt. The corridor beyond was still there, faint, twisting, waiting. But Harry wasn't ready to walk it alone, so the next morning he made a choice, not in a grand way, just a small one, a whisper of a decision that fluttered its wings quietly in his heart. He told Hermione, not everything, not yet, just enough to share the weight, enough to feel less like a secret and more like a beginning. They sat beneath the beech tree by the lake, its golden leaves fluttering around them like old parchment, and Harry spoke in low tones about the mirror, the circle of reflections, the candle, the strange message. Hermione didn't interrupt. She just listened, the way she did when something mattered deeply to someone else. And when he finished, she asked only one question. "Do you want me to come with you?" Harry paused, and then he nodded, and so, that night, they both stood before the mirror. It shimmered a little differently now. Perhaps it recognized Hermione. Perhaps it simply understood. Together, they stepped through. The circle of mirrors welcomed them with their gentle hum, the runes glowing softly around the walls. The pedestal still held the candle, now unlit again, though the memory of its flame still echoed in the air like warmth that refused to vanish. The sketched door on the far wall remained, but now it pulsed brighter. Hermione's eyes widened. "It's beautiful," she whispered. It's not just a door. It's a choice." Harry smiled faintly. "That's exactly what it is." Hermione stepped closer. Her fingers had hovered just above the surface of the door's glowing outline, and it responded not with a sound, but with a feeling, like the air around them bowed slightly, acknowledging something sacred. She turned to him. "I think it doesn't open for just anyone. I think it opens when someone is ready to see what lies beyond, not just walk through it." Harry nodded. It was strange how right that felt. Not everything in the magical world had rules. Some things had rhythms instead, and this mirror, this door, it listened to the quiet music of the heart. They didn't open it that night. Instead, they explored. Not the corridor beyond, but the room itself. They began to notice things that hadn't stood out before. One of the 12 mirrors showed not reflections, but memories. Hermione's mirror shimmered with a soft replay of her first spell in Charms class, the light in her eyes unmistakable. Another mirror, when touched lightly, hummed with the sound of the Sorting Hat's song, though no words could be made out. In the corner near the pedestal, a book now rested. It hadn't been there before. Its cover was unmarked. Inside, pages were blank, but as Hermione flipped through them, soft sketches began to appear, quills moving gently without ink, drawing images of what had occurred in the room, Harry lighting the candle, Hermione reaching for the door. The room was recording them, not to watch, but to remember. "Maybe it's not just a secret," Hermione whispered. "Maybe it's a witness." They left the room gently, not wanting to disturb the softness they'd found within. The mirrors faded behind them as they stepped through the gateway, the surface rippling closed like water touched by wind. That night, as they sat by the fire, Ron wandered over, puzzled. "You two've been sneaking off like a pair of secret agents lately." Hermione gave him a look, but Harry smiled. "Just exploring something old," he said quietly. Ron raised a brow. "Anything I'd understand?" "Maybe one day," Harry replied, "when it's ready." "When we are," Ron rolled his eyes. "Mystical nonsense. You've both been hanging around too many dusty portraits." And with that, he flopped down to play a game of exploding snap with Seamus. But Harry and Hermione looked at each other and knew, whatever they had discovered, it wasn't done unfolding. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dangerous, but it was magical, and it had chosen them. Or perhaps they had chosen it. One quiet step at a time, and then he nodded, and so, that night, they both stood before the mirror. It shimmered a little differently now. Perhaps it recognized Hermione. Perhaps it simply understood. Together, they stepped through. The circle of mirrors welcomed them with their gentle hum, the runes glowing softly around the walls. The pedestal still held the candle, now unlit again, though the memory of its flame still echoed in the air like warmth that refused to vanish. The sketched door on the far wall remained, but now it pulsed brighter. Hermione's eyes widened. "It's beautiful," she whispered. It's not just a door. It's a choice." Harry smiled faintly. "That's exactly what it is." Hermione stepped closer. Her fingers had hovered just above the surface of the door's glowing outline, and it responded not with a sound, but with a feeling, like the air around them bowed slightly, acknowledging something sacred. She turned to him. "I think it doesn't open for just anyone. I think it opens when someone is ready to see what lies beyond, not just walk through it." Harry nodded. It was strange how right that felt. Not everything in the magical world had rules. Some things had rhythms instead, and this mirror, this door, it listened to the quiet music of the heart. They didn't open it that night. Instead, they explored. Not the corridor beyond, but the room itself. They began to notice things that hadn't stood out before. One of the 12 mirrors showed not reflections, but memories. Hermione's mirror shimmered with a soft replay of her first spell in Charms class, the light in her eyes unmistakable. Another mirror, when touched lightly, hummed with the sound of the Sorting Hat's song, though no words could be made out. In the corner near the pedestal, a book now rested. It hadn't been there before. Its cover was unmarked. Inside, pages were blank, but as Hermione flipped through them, soft sketches began to appear, quills moving gently without ink, drawing images of what had occurred in the room, Harry lighting the candle, Hermione reaching for the door. The room was recording them, not to watch, but to remember. Maybe it's not just a secret, Hermione whispered. Maybe it's a witness. They left the room gently, not wanting to disturb the softness they'd found within. The mirrors faded behind them as they stepped through the gateway, the surface rippling closed like water touched by wind. That night, as they sat by the fire, Ron wandered over, puzzled. You two've been sneaking off like a pair of secret agents lately. Hermione gave him a look, but Harry smiled. Just exploring something. Old, he said quietly. Ron raised a brow. Anything I'd understand? Maybe one day, Harry replied, when it's ready. When we are Ron rolled his eyes. Mystical nonsense. You've both been hanging around too many dusty portraits, and with that, he flopped down to play a game of exploding snap with Seamus. But Harry and Hermione looked at each other and knew, whatever they had discovered, it wasn't done unfolding. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dangerous, but it was magical, and it had chosen them. Or perhaps they had chosen it. One quiet step at a time. The next evening came wrapped in clouds that floated low and soft, like the castle itself had exhaled and drawn a blanket over its shoulders. Candles flickered in the windows, casting a warm glow on the stone, and the lake shimmered faintly beneath a curtain of mist. Everything felt hushed, like Hogwarts knew something was about to be revealed and was quietly watching. Harry and Hermione returned to the mirror. No words were spoken between them this time. Their footsteps down the corridor echoed gently, respectful of the silence, as if even the portraits dared not whisper. The mirror's surface greeted them like an old friend, calm, reflective, knowing. Harry reached out first. The glass softened at his touch, rippling gently, and they stepped through together. The mirrored chamber waited, unchanged, and yet somehow more alive. The air buzzed lightly, not in a way that startled, but in a way that stirred memory. The candle remained unlit on its pedestal. The blank book rested nearby, its pages still recording without ink, and the sketched door, now glowing more clearly than ever, no longer looked like a drawing. It looked real, three-dimensional, solid, as if it had always been there, hiding behind illusion. Hermione's voice was quiet. I think it's time. Harry nodded. He didn't feel fear, only a deep sense of readiness, like waking up slowly and finding yourself already dressed, already steady, already standing at the threshold of something that had waited just for you. Together, they stepped toward the door. As they drew near, the glowing runes around the chamber pulsed once, gently, like a heartbeat, and then as slowly dimmed. A single breath passed between them, and the door shimmered, then opened inward, without a sound. Inside was not another room, not quite. It was a space between spaces, a long corridor of shifting starlight and swirling time, a hallway that didn't seem to have walls or a ceiling, only the suggestion of both. The floor felt real underfoot, though they could see stars beneath it, soft galaxies spinning below like a reflection of the night sky turned upside down. They walked slowly, guided by instinct more than direction, and then they saw it. At the far end, floating slightly above a curved platform of light, was a memory. But not just a memory, a piece of truth, a moment lost in time, waiting for someone brave and gentle enough to see it. It shimmered into view. A young woman in Hogwarts robes, perhaps 17, standing before the very same mirror Harry had found. She was laughing, her hand pressed against the glass, not stepping through, but whispering something to it. Behind her stood a much younger Dumbledore, watching her quietly, respectfully, and then a voice, not from the memory, but from the space itself, soft layered with age and kindness. She was my sister. Harry's breath caught. It was Dumbledore's voice, but not his living voice. This was something older, etched into magic, preserved in the folds of the mirror's enchantment. Ariana, she found this place long before anyone else did, a sanctuary between what is known and what is felt. She couldn't express it, not in words, not often, but this place listened. It helped her show the truths she couldn't speak. The memory shifted, showing Ariana weaving light with her fingers, delicate threads of silver and blue that danced through the air like strands of music. It wasn't a spell. It was something older than spell work, something gentler, emotional magic, memory magic. She created this door, the voice continued, not with her wand, but with her heart. It was her gift, a place for those who carried questions too quiet for classrooms and answers too sacred for words. Hermione wiped at her cheek silently, her eyes glassy. Harry's throat tightened. He watched Ariana smile, her gaze distant, but content, as if she had finally made peace with the world in her own quiet language. Then the image faded, and a new scene bloomed. This time, it was Harry himself, as a baby, sleeping in his crib at Godric's Hollow. The door to the nursery slightly ajar. James and Lily just outside, talking in low voices. Their love filled the room even without sound, even without touch. And there, standing in the corner, was Dumbledore, younger, somber, holding something in his hands. It was a small silver mirror, not the Mirror of Erised, something smaller, something more personal. He placed it gently on the dresser beside baby Harry and whispered, "One day, when the time is kind, let him find it. Let him feel what words cannot tell him." Hermione's hand reached for Harry's, holding it tightly. The memory faded again, and they were left standing in the glowing corridor. The voice returned. This place was never meant to be a secret, only a sanctuary. For those who carry questions, their hearts are ready to hear. No test, no riddle, only remembrance, only reflection. The floating platform slowly lowered, inviting them. But there was no need to step forward. The revelation had already arrived, not in answers, but in understanding. Harry turned to Hermione, eyes bright but peaceful. She made this for people like her and like us. Hermione nodded, to remember what matters, even if the world forgets. They stood there for a long moment, no urgency, no fear, just stillness, acceptance. Then the corridor slowly began to dim, and the door behind them called them home. They didn't rush, they didn't speak, they simply returned the way they came and stepped quietly back into the mirrored chamber. As they exited the mirror for the final time, the surface shimmered once more, then stilled completely, returning to plain glass. But it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like something had come full circle, back in the familiar hallway, outside the room of hidden mirrors. The air felt different, not colder or warmer, just still, like a deep exhale had settled over the stones, and silence was now something sacred. Harry and Hermione stood side by side, letting the quiet wash over them. There was no rush to speak, no pressure to explain, only the soft understanding that they had seen something meant to be felt more than spoken. The flickering torchlight painted soft shapes on the walls, but none of them danced. Everything had grown peaceful, deliberate. It was as though even Hogwarts itself was offering a pause, a lullaby made of stone and memory and candle wax. Harry looked down at his hand. He hadn't realized he was still holding Hermione's, and neither had she. They exchanged a small, warm glance, tired but steady. There were no answers waiting, no puzzles left to solve, just the comfort of knowing they had witnessed something true and beautiful. As they wandered slowly back toward the common room, their footsteps seemed to echo less and less. The castle had folded itself into rest. Paintings had closed their eyes, staircases stood still, suits of armor leaned against the walls as if dozing. Even the portraits of sleeping witches no longer stirred to grumble about students out late. When they reached the fat lady's portrait, she didn't ask for the password. She simply smiled, a small, secret smile, and opened the passageway with a wink. Inside the Gryffindor common room, the fire had burned low, casting long orange shadows across the rugs and chairs. The armchairs were all unoccupied, as if the room had made space just for them. Hermione settled on the couch nearest the hearth and tucked her legs under her, her robe slipping slightly to reveal socks with little moons stitched into the fabric. Harry sat beside her, pulling a blanket down from the back of the sofa and wrapping it loosely around both their shoulders. Neither of them said good night. It was understood that sleep would come soon, but not quite yet. Not before this moment had time to settle, not before they had fully returned from where they'd been. "I think," Hermione began softly, her voice no louder than the crackling logs, "I think that mirror was always meant to be found by someone like you." Harry tilted his head. "Why me?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she watched the firelight reflect in the glass of the window, the way it shimmered like starlight against a dark sky. "Because you always see what others might overlook. You don't rush, you feel first. And maybe Ariana made that room for people who listen in with their hearts." Harry's eyes dropped slightly. He wasn't sure what to say, but something warm unfurled in his chest, like a spell that didn't need words to work. Outside the window, snow began to fall again. Slow flakes drifting sideways, caught in no wind, as if they too had decided to rest. The kind of snowfall that made you think of letters waiting to be written and dreams waiting to be remembered. They stayed that way for a while, watching the fire fade, listening to the castle sleep. And then Hermione, without moving her head, said, "Do you think the door will ever open again?" Harry thought for a moment. "I think It opens when someone truly needs to see it, not when they're looking for it, but when it's time. Hermione nodded slowly, her eyes now half-lidded, and with that, the last threads of mystery melted into comfort. The unknown no longer felt like a question. It felt like a blanket, wrapping them in something timeless and kind. Harry reached out and gently stirred the last embers with a poker. The red glow flared softly, then dimmed again into the hush of night. Then, wrapping the blanket a little tighter, he let his eyes close, not because he was tired, but because everything had finally found its place. So now, my sleepy friend, the fire has gone quiet, and the footsteps have long since faded into the carpets of Hogwarts. The mirror is hidden once more, and the door behind it waits, patient, timeless, untouched by clocks. And Harry, he sleeps now, peacefully wrapped in a world that understands him. A world that whispered its secrets just loud enough for his heart to hear. Maybe the magic behind that mirror wasn't meant to change the world. Maybe it was just meant to remind us that love lingers, that memory holds warmth, and that some doors only open when you're ready, not with spells or force, but with quiet trust. And maybe, just maybe, the most powerful magic isn't found in ancient tomes or glowing wands, but in the courage to see yourself clearly and the kindness to let others do the same. So if you too ever feel a pull towards something forgotten, a shimmer just out of sight, or a feeling you can't quite explain, maybe it's the magic reminding you that you're part of this world too. That wonder still waits in corners and mirrors and soft candlelit rooms. Tonight, as the moon watches from above the castle towers and the wind hums softly against the old stone walls, let yourself rest. You are safe. You are seen. And like Harry, you have a place in this story, whether you're walking through enchanted hallways or simply drifting off under your blankets. Let the weight of the day fall away now. Let the warmth of magic wrap around your shoulders, and let your dreams carry you somewhere gentle, where doors open to kindness, mirrors reflect hope, and every soft footstep leads to something quietly wonderful. Good night, dear one. Sleep well. And remember, somewhere behind a mirror no one else sees, Hogwarts is still dreaming of you.